In this lesson, I want to show how to write functions that use multiple input parameter groups, and also want to combine that with how to use code blocks or by name values inside those parameter groups so you can create your own custom control structures. So just to show something fairly simple to get started, we will start with this code right here and paste that in. Now we just need a little main method here, so we'll just call this one main. And what I just want to do is show that when we call add, we pass in 3 input parameter values like that, and just give a little more space down there. Save that, and let's come over here and start that compiling. And you can see we get the result 6 right there, which is what we expected when we add these 3 together. And now the only thing different with multiple input parameter groups is you can separate these into different groups. So you can say, well, I want that to be one group. I want B to be in this second group. And I want C to be the third group. And you don't have to change any of the other code up there, but you do have to come down here and change that. And the way you call it now is with 3 parameter groups like that. And scoot back here, move that over, save that. And again, we see the value 6 down here. So using multiple input parameter groups is just as easy as I just showed you. You just break them up into different groups like that. And when I first started with Scala, I was like, why in the world would I ever do something like that? I didn't understand that. And it turns out that when you combine this technique with what I call code blocks, or what are more formally known as by name parameters, you start to see the power of this. So let's clear that out. And now let's say imagine a world where the while keyword didn't exist, and you wanted to do some sort of loop like this. So you say var I equals 0. And yes, I am using a var, but just for this example. So we'll say whilst. What I want to do is create my own whilst control structure, and it will work just like a while loop. So again, if you imagine that while doesn't exist, what I want to do is say, well, while I is less than 3, what I want to do is just say print line what I equals $I right there. And then I better make sure I increment that like that. So this is the type of code I'd like to write. And now the way to do this is to combine what you just saw with this code right here with these 3 different parameter groups like that. And now we combine that with the by name values that I spoke about in a previous video. So what happens is that this is one input parameter group. And even though the syntax is a little different, this is a second input parameter group right here. And the way this works is we'll come up here and we'll define whilst to take 2 input parameter groups, which I just talked about. And whilst is used for a side effect, right? So you can see where I'm doing print line and then I'm doing this right here. Whilst doesn't return anything useful. So we can actually fill in its return value right there and say that's going to be unit. And that's, again, because that doesn't return anything useful. And now, as I've mentioned, this is the first code block. And when you think about that, what is that? What is this equation that I have there, or that expression? And what I'm testing is I less than 3. So I is an integer. Is 0 less than 3? Yes, it is. So that's true. So what I'm getting at is this is a Boolean value here. And what I mean by that is now I want to say, well, this is going to be my test condition. And I'm going to define it as a by name parameter, which means I don't put anything right here in this area. And I just come over here and say, well, this is going to be a block of code right here that returns a Boolean. So that's my first parameter group right there. And that is this one right here. And now my second parameter group is here. And as you see, I just happen to have this one enclosed in curly braces. But let's think about this block of code here. And again, you think that, well, this code here is kind of being used for a side effect of printing. And then this is incrementing the value I right there. So this is returning unit as well. So you can think of this as being the body of the code. Again, this is a by name parameter, and this one is returning unit. And then again, this input parameter group right here refers to this second input parameter group right there. And actually, I'm going to change that parameter because I prefer the name code block myself. And the way we could implement this body is a couple of different ways. Now, first thing I could do is cheat and use the while keyword that is built into Scala. So I could say, while the test condition is true, then go ahead and run that code block. And that's one possible way to implement that. And if I haven't made any mistakes, then we should see the output here. I equals 0, I equals 1, I equals 2 right there. And this is actually the way I usually teach this, is because I don't want you to get bogged down on what's inside of here. My whole purpose for this lesson is to show these two things. First of all, multiple parameter groups like this one and this one. And then also I want to show how we pass in these by name arguments right here and right here. And before I get too far away from it, it's really important that these are by name parameters right here, because we don't want this code evaluated until right here. And anytime you want to defer this calculation right there to here, that's when you come back and you make this a by name parameter. And I talked about this before, and that's why you can think of test condition as being a def method. So you can think of this being passed in as a code block, and then in here, it's treated as a method and it's not executed until right there. So the first time it comes in, it actually comes in, is I less than 3 or is 0 less than 3? And that's actually what's right here. The first time is 0 less than 3. It's not evaluated until that moment right there. And if that's true, then this code block right here comes into here, and then it's executed only right now. So again, this code block is just like a def method, and it's executed right here. So that's why we get print line I equals 0 that first time. And now is a little bonus if you want to see a different way to implement that body. One way we could do this is with a tail recursive loop. So again, we're in bonus territory right here, and I'm going to create a loop as a function, and it's not going to take any input parameters, and it's going to return unit. And then inside of here, I'm going to say if the test condition, which again won't be evaluated until right now, then execute that code block, and then loop again. And here I'm going to close off that end statement, and then I'm going to close off that looping function. And the last thing we have to do is start the loop like that. So if it didn't make any mistakes, let me press save. And hopefully the only mistake I made was I did not import Scala.annotation tailrec. And save that again. And there we go. So again, everything inside of here is bonus territory as far as this lesson goes. But I wanted to show that if the while loop control structure didn't exist, this is actually how you create your own whilst loop control structure. And this uses tail recursion right here. And I covered recursion in previous lessons, so I don't want to get into this too much. So I'll make sure I include a link here back to those previous lessons if you want to check those out. And now one last thing I'd like to do in this lesson is this second part here. So I want you to imagine that you want to write a function called if both are true. And as you can see in this code right here, it looks like if both are true is like a control structure, because it takes something here and it takes something here and it runs this part right here. So that's almost looks like a control structure. It's similar to a while loop in a way. But my questions for you is, as you look at this right here, if you come down, if you look at the code, you should be able to answer these questions. And the first question is, how many input parameter groups does this have? And then as we dig into the details, you want to know what is the type of the first group? What is the type of the second group? And I guess I give the first answer away, because then I say, what is the type of the third group, or the third input parameter group? So if you think you know all those answers, go ahead and stop this video and go ahead and start writing this code yourself. But now if you'd like to see me implement this, you are in the right place, because what I'm going to do is create this function. So again, when we look at that right there, we know that the function is named if both true. And as I gave away right here, there are actually 3 input parameter groups here. So this is the first input parameter group right there. This is the second input parameter group. And then this one is the third input parameter group. And this is actually a fairly common pattern. I probably should mention that, where you have shorter parameter groups like these, and then a larger block of code is the third parameter group. So that means we're going to have one parameter group, two parameter groups, and three. And one thing we can say about this is that, again, it's being used for a side effect like printing in this example. So if both are true, do this, and then there is no significant return value. So that's how we can tell that our return type of this function is going to be unit. And then we don't know what that body is going to be yet, but now we can look at this and say, well, this one is some sort of test condition, right? So if age 30 is greater than 18, that's true. So again, that's a Boolean. If number of accidents equals 0, that one's going to be a Boolean too. So as it turns out, you could think of this as being test 1, and that's going to be a by name parameter. It's going to transform that into a Boolean. And then this one is going to be test 2. It's also going to be a by name parameter. I'll do some unusual formatting here just to make this a little more readable for now. And then our third parameter group, what is that one going to be? So I'm letting you think about it, and I haven't thought about this in a minute either, so let me think. So this is doing print line, and again, that just evaluates to a unit. So this will be our code block right here. Another by name parameter, and it's going to transform whatever that code block is into a unit type right there. And really, in this particular example, I should have known that from the unit type right there. And now all we have to do is fill in that function body. And I know my formatting is a little bit wonky, but really all we want to say is, well, if test 1 is true, and you could say equals true right here like that, but you don't have to do that. We just say if true, and this is true, then run that code block like that. And now we try a little test and say, well, how about age equals, I don't know, 19, and hopefully number of accidents equals 0. Now we can say if both are true, so age greater than 18 and number of accidents equals 0, then something like print line, congratulations, save that, and come down here. And of course, you can tell that this is late in the day because I was just compiling the wrong program. So now I am compiling and running the correct program here with this command. This one is called ifBothTrue. What I was doing earlier was I was accidentally running this one, and I meant to run this one. So now that we are running this one, you can see the congratulations output right here. And that comes from inside of ifBothTrue there. And now if you like a little bit of homework, what you can do is put any Boolean condition you want inside of that one, put any Boolean condition you want inside of that one, and put in a block of code over here that returns unit, and you can go ahead and test if both true. And that should work because all we're doing here is we're testing the first condition, the second one, and then running the code block. Other than that, what I mentioned that I wanted to cover in this lesson was how to write code using multiple input parameter groups. So I've done that here. This one has 3 input parameter groups. And if I go back to this previous code, the whilst code, we were using 2 input parameter groups there. And in both of these cases, I was using by name parameters inside these groups. So here, here, and in all of these groups here. And I hope both of these examples demonstrate the power of this technique because they allow you to write what appear to be your own control structures like this one here and like this whilst control structure right here. And as one other point, if you've ever used a testing framework in Scala, you'll notice that they look an awful lot like this control structure, don't they? So they usually say test, then there's some type of string here that says my first test or something like that. And then there's some code inside of here that ends with an assert condition. So you assert something to be true. So if you ever wondered how test frameworks work, now you can see exactly how they work. They're written to take 2 input parameter groups. The first one is a string, which is an identifier for your test. And then this is the second input parameter group. And you can imagine that this is coded to look at this as a Boolean value right here. So knowing that, you can imagine that test is a function, has 2 input parameter groups. The first one is just a simple string like that, and it could be called an identifier if you prefer. And the second one is just a Boolean variable. So this would be the test condition there, or the assert condition, and that would be a by name value, and it transforms that into a Boolean. So if you ever want to write your own test framework, you can start with code just like that.